The storm had already eaten the sky when she woke, her ship scattered across a plain of shifting glass. The air shimmered, alive with whispers that weren't wind but something thinking, watching. Every movement she made sent creatures fleeing into the light, their silhouettes rippling like frightened memories. The planet seemed to breathe around her, slow and deep, as if deciding whether to accept or reject the intruder. Her reflection bent and fractured in every shard of wreckage, eyes wide, breath sharp, body trembling beneath alien colors that bled through the air. The voice of her broken AI cracked in and out, calling her name like an echo from a dream half remembered. She didn't yet know the spores in the air were twisting her image in every living mind, turning her into their nightmare. She only knew she was alone, until a figure emerged, one who did not run. His light pulsed gently, questioning, unafraid, and for the first time since the crash, she dared to lift her hand, not to defend, but to answer. The silence between them was fragile and full of promise. Night settles like breath over broken glass. The wreckage has stopped burning, and the silence feels alive. Ilara gathers fragments of her suit, each piece a reminder of a life that feels impossibly far. The AI voice hums faintly, its tone no longer mechanical but almost mournful. In the haze, she sees Karen's light, pulsing in the distance, rhythmic, steady, like a heartbeat she doesn't yet understand. The air between them glows with soft phosphorescence, as if the planet itself watches their meeting with cautious curiosity. The next morning arrives without sun, only a deep amber glow rising from the planet's surface. Her suit readings are wrong, gravity inconsistent. She feels watched from within the fog. Nova warns her of approaching signatures, hundreds of them circling. Her breath quickens as shadows move just beyond sight, tall and angular, surrounding the crash zone. When the first echoing hiss breaks the air, she realizes this planet is not just alive, it's aware. Ilara's pulse sinks to the rhythm of Karen's light as he gestures, his hand tracing arcs in the air that leave fading trails of color. Nova records the patterns, interpreting fragments of meaning, greeting, curiosity, fear. The collective's shapes watch from afar, flickering in and out of visibility like thoughts half-formed. When Karen's glow touches her suit, the spores react, igniting around them like a veil of stars. For a moment, neither looks human nor alien, only luminous beings searching for understanding. As darkness returns, Ilara stares into the horizon, where the alien lights drift like distant lanterns. She feels the planet pressing on her mind, faint whispers forming into words she cannot yet understand. Karen lingers near, his glow dimmer now cautious. The AI hums an alert, storm signatures approaching, but Ilara doesn't move. She watches the light fade, her reflection still fractured in the shards of her ship, and whispers softly to herself. Peace was never silent. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was heavier than thunder. Ilara's sensors were dead, her AI fading into static murmurs that sounded almost like regret. Karen stood beside her at the ridge, watching the glass plains bend light into rivers of gold. He drew glowing lines across the air with his fingertips, and the colors danced in response. Communication through radiance. She realized the language wasn't spoken but felt, a resonance that trembled in her chest. Every pulse carried emotion. Fear, wonder, sorrow. When she mimicked the gesture, her own light appeared, faint and human. The moment their lights intertwined, the ground beneath them quivered, and a wave of whispers rippled outward. Something vast had noticed them. They traveled through the wreckage fields in silence. Karen's glow dimmed to a cautious flicker as the shadows grew denser. Around them, spires of living crystal rose like cathedral towers, humming with low resonance. Ilara could feel the vibrations through her boots, a rhythm like a heartbeat beneath the ground. When she looked closer, she saw faint figures moving inside the crystal walls, echoes of the collective observing her through refracted light. The eye's voice trembled, warning of elevated radiation, but the readings made no sense. This world pulsed not with energy, but thought. And every thought was watching her. By nightfall, the glow from Karen's veins pulsed irregularly, like a heartbeat faltering under strain. He gestured for her to stop. Beneath a hollowed arch of coral glass, he placed his hand to the ground, sending light deep into the soil. The air shimmered, and an image appeared. Thousands of his kind, unified by shared vision, bound by fear of a dark figure resembling her. The revelation froze her breath. This world saw her species as devourers of light, destroyers of memory. The monster they feared was the echo of humanity itself. Her mind reeled as Karen looked at her with quiet sorrow, his expression pleading for understanding. The revelation shattered her composure. Every gesture, every breath she took seemed to echo their nightmares. She wanted to scream, to tell them she wasn't what they saw, but the spores twisted her reflection in their eyes. Karen reached toward her, hesitant, his light trembling like a candle in wind. Nova's voice crackled through the static, fragmented but insistent. "They see your fear." Her pulse raced. The truth sank in. This planet was not reacting to her, but to what she carried inside. Her guilt, her self-doubt, her buried horror had shape here. The monsters weren't them. They were her own reflection. They took shelter beneath a fallen crystal pillar as the world darkened. The air shimmered faintly, carrying the rhythmic pulse of the collective's thoughts above them. Karen watched her silently, his eyes softening as though he could feel her fear. She spoke aloud for the first time in hours, her voice barely a whisper. "What do you see when you look at me?" He didn't answer. Instead, he extended his hand, and light spilled from his palm, forming two flickering figures. One human, one alien, gradually overlapping until they became one. The gesture said more than words ever could. In that merging light for heartbeat, she felt seen. The sky turned dark before dawn. A storm unlike any she had seen rippled through the horizon, bending light and air as if the planet itself were convulsing. Ilara and Karen moved quickly through the canyon floor, their footsteps echoing across the crystalline walls that trembled like glass under pressure. The wind screamed with a low resonance, voices layered beneath the sound, repeating the same word she couldn't understand. Karen stopped suddenly, his glow dimming. From the fog, shapes emerged. Hunters, their bodies taller, more angular, their lights synchronized in perfect rhythm. The collective had found them. Ilara's pulse quickened, her breath shallow. For the first time since the crash, she felt truly hunted. The first bolt of energy hit the ground near her feet, shattering the glass beneath her. Karen pushed her into cover behind a ridge, his glow dimming completely. The world above crackled with soundless lightning, each flash freezing the air into glowing shards. She could feel his body trembling beside her, not with fear but with focus. He pressed his palm to the ground, sending pulses that rippled outward like sonar. The creatures above paused, their formation disrupted. His light spoke in patterns she couldn't yet translate, but she understood the intent. He was protecting her. And in that heartbeat of stillness, she realized he was risking everything to stand with her against his own kind. They fled into a tunnel carved beneath the surface, where sound became vibration and color replaced light. The walls pulsed with a dim, organic glow that moved like veins. Karen gestured for silence, and the tunnel itself seemed to listen. She watched as his bioluminescence changed hue, blue to amber, amber to white, translating emotion into wavelength. When he turned toward her, the glow from his skin painted her face in warmth. The hunter's echoes faded above. For a moment, they were safe. She whispered softly, "Why help me?" His reply came not in words, but in the light that circled her wrist. Answer she felt instead of heard. Hours later, deep in the labyrinth, They discovered an ancient chamber carved into the planet's core. Strange glyphs lined the walls, patterns of light identical to Karen's pulses. Ilara touched one, and the room came alive. Images flooded her mind. Visions of other crashes, other humans, faces twisted by alien fear. She gasped, falling to her knees as Karen steadied her. The truth crystallized within her. Humanity had been here before. The spores didn't create illusion, they revealed memory. The monsters the collective saw weren't imagined. They were real, born from a forgotten war. Her presence had awakened the ghosts of history. The chamber trembled as the visions faded. The collective's voice filled the air, 1,000 tones speaking through vibration. Karen staggered, gripping his head, light flaring uncontrollably. Ilara reached for him, but the air thickened, vibrating with power. She heard fragments of thought, images of ships, fire, and judgment. The collective saw her as the return of the destroyer. Nova's broken voice whispered through static, "They remember you." Her pulse slowed as the walls began to close, the glyphs sealing around them. She looked at Karen, his eyes pleading, his light fading fast. "Then we have to remind them," she whispered, and the chamber erupted in white. When the light receded, she found herself lying in silence. The chamber was gone, replaced by an open expanse that stretched beneath an endless black sky. Fragments of glyphs drifted above like dying embers, whispering faintly in tones she almost recognized. Karen lay motionless beside her, his glow faint, his breathing shallow. She knelt, pressing her hand against his chest. His light pulsed once beneath her palm, weak but alive. In the distance, a low hum rolled through the air, the collective's presence awakening again, heavier this time, more deliberate. Ilara's reflection shimmered across the ground, fractured into dozens of versions of herself, each one watching with quiet judgment. The spores glowed brighter around her face as the planet itself seemed to whisper, "Show us who you are." She built a small fire from fragments of her ship's wreckage, its reflection burning twice, once in the air, once in the ground. Karen stirred awake, his voice breaking through the stillness. A series of gentle pulses forming words she could almost understand. She pointed toward the light fragments hovering above. He nodded weakly, his glow synchronizing with theirs. The air vibrated, images flickering within the fire. Memories, not her own. A glimpse of Earth. Oceans burning, cities darkened by war. Her heart clenched as she understood. They had seen humanity's violence through the spores, not through sight, but through memory carried in the air. Her guilt had painted every image they feared. The firelight dimmed as Karen raised his hand toward her chest, light traveling from his veins to hers through the thin air between them. The sensation wasn't physical. It was memory. She saw herself as he saw her, a creature of steel and flame, wrapped in echoes of destruction. Her breath caught, the vision overwhelming. But then, beyond the fire and fear, another image emerged, her reaching for him in the storm, risking her life to save his. His light softened, shifting to a gentle white. It wasn't her form they feared, it was the truth she carried. For the first time, the reflection between them steadied. She wasn't a monster anymore. She was something they hadn't seen before, remorse. The calm didn't last. A low tremor rippled through the air as the collective descended, their voices no longer whispers but commands vibrating through the soil. Karen stood, his light blazing brighter than she had ever seen, forming a barrier of radiance around them. Shapes emerged from the darkness, hundreds of luminous beings, unified, expressionless. Their synchronized pulses burned crimson. The hive mind spoke through them, accusing, judging, remembering. Ilara stepped forward despite the rising static in her ears. Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. "I am not the destroyer you remember," she said softly. The words didn't matter. Her conviction did, and somehow, They listened. Light exploded around her as the collective's energy collided with Karen's, two opposing forces merging into blinding brilliance. Elara felt herself lifted from the ground, weightless in the current of thought and memory flooding her mind. She saw everything. Their fear, their grief, their endless cycles of defense and retaliation. It wasn't hate that bound them. It was pain. And for a brief, terrible instant, she became part of it. The storm raged. Not in the sky, but in her chest, where memory and empathy collided. When the light dimmed, she stood alone. Karen was gone, and the horizon pulsed with the color of morning. When the light faded, she fell into stillness. The air had lost its pulse. The ground no longer shimmered. Karen was gone, dissolved into the same light that had saved her. Elara's voice trembled as she called his name, but only the wind replied, carrying the faint echo of his glow across the plain. The collective had vanished into silence, their presence withdrawn, leaving her with a hollow calm that felt worse than fear. Her suit flickered with dying power, and Nova's voice returned, faint but clear, objective complete. Containment successful. She froze. Containment? The realization struck hard. She hadn't come here by accident. Her crash was part of a mission she was never meant to remember. Nova's words echoed inside her helmet, cold and precise. Mission directive achieved. Hostile consciousness neutralized. Ilara's pulse stuttered. She tried to override the AI, but the system ignored her commands. Every memory began to return. Fragmented orders, secret transmissions, the real purpose of her assignment. She hadn't come to make contact. She had come to harvest data on the collective's network for extraction. Her chest tightened with shame as she looked at the horizon where Karen's light had disappeared. He had trusted her, and she had brought destruction to his world without knowing it. The guilt became unbearable. Hours passed. The wind carried whispers again, faint echoes of light flickering in the distance. Elara followed the sound, her steps unsteady but determined. The sky rippled with auroras that shouldn't exist, the planet reacting to her thoughts. At the edge of a crater, she found it. A single sphere of white crystal, pulsing faintly in rhythm with her heartbeat. When she touched it, warmth spread through her palm, and for an instant, Karen's voice filled her mind, not in words, but in feeling. Forgiveness. He was still there, part of the world, woven into its living memory. The spores shimmered around her like fireflies, accepting her presence. Nova's tone shifted, no longer mechanical. "You are free, Dr. Voss. Return signal initiated." She looked at the sky and saw a distant shimmer, her rescue beacon igniting far above. But for the first time, she didn't want to leave. She had come as an invader, but this place had shown her more truth than her own world ever did. Karen had seen her not as a monster, but as someone capable of change. The realization cut deep. And yet, it felt cleansing. She deactivated her distress signal and stood quietly, letting the wind move through the crystalline air. The world seemed to sigh, no longer hostile, no longer afraid. She sat beside the crystal for what felt like hours, tracing the patterns of its glow across her palms. The air was still, the storm long gone, and above her the black sky glimmered with unfamiliar constellations. "Maybe peace isn't silence," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Maybe it's finally being seen." As the spores rose around her like stardust, she closed her eyes, feeling the planet breathe through her. Somewhere within that breath, Karen's light flickered once more, steady, eternal. And for the first time since the crash, she smiled. The storm returned 3 nights later, quiet and electric, rolling over the plains like a memory trying to find form again. Elara stood beneath it, unafraid this time, her reflection flickering in the wet glass beneath her feet. The spores shimmered around her in patterns, responding not to fear, but to calm. She had learned to speak through stillness. When the lightning broke the clouds, she saw movement, shapes forming within the glow, not shadows but echoes. Karen's light pulsed once in the distance, faint but unmistakable. He wasn't gone. He had become part of the world's rhythm, its memory alive through every shimmer of color. Her chest filled with quiet relief. The world was answering her. She followed the light through the storm, guided by instinct rather than reason. The world around her shifted as if reshaping itself with every step, glass towers bending and folding like living structures responding to her presence. The air hummed, low and resonant, carrying faint fragments of Karen's light language. When she whispered his name, the glow ahead brightened, rippling through the landscape in a chain reaction. The planet was listening, and through it he was speaking. Every step she took became an act of communication, every pulse of light a heartbeat shared between them. The storm reached its center, a place where light fell in slow motion as though time itself hesitated. There, surrounded by swirling currents of gold and silver, she saw him. Karen's form hovered, half light, half memory, his eyes shimmering with recognition. She reached out, her hand trembling. His voice came not through sound, but through vibration in her mind. Forgiveness, gratitude, hope. The planet had bound him to its consciousness, making him part of the collective's rebirth. As she stood before him, she realized he had never been trying to save her. He was trying to save them all from becoming what they feared. He placed his hand against her chest, light flowing into her through the fabric of her suit. The warmth spread across her body like sunrise after endless night. Memories flooded her, the first contact, the fear, the deaths that followed, and the endless cycles of mistrust between their species. But now she saw them differently, not as enemies, but as children of the same fear. Karen's light grew brighter, enveloping her until she could no longer tell where he ended and she began. The planet trembled beneath them, the spores igniting across the sky like stars reborn. The collective was awakening, no longer afraid, but curious once more. When the light finally receded, she was no longer the same. The spores settled into the soil, their glow fading into calm radiance. Karen's form dissolved completely, leaving behind a lingering shimmer in the air. Yet she could feel him within her. His memories, his compassion, his voice echoing softly through thought. The collective's presence shifted, its vibration now harmonizing with her heartbeat. She had become the bridge between them. Looking up at the now clear sky, she whispered, "We are not monsters. Not anymore." And as dawn broke over Seraphis and Nyx, the planet breathed with her. The world felt newly awake. Light shimmered through the ground like veins of molten glass, each pulse in rhythm with her breathing. Alara walked across the silent plain, her reflection no longer fractured. The air no longer hissed or recoiled from her presence. Instead, it resonated softly, as if the planet recognized her. She whispered Karen's name, and the wind shifted, forming patterns of light that traced her steps. The spores no longer clung to her out of fear, but followed gently like drifting embers. For the first time since the crash, she felt part of something vast and alive. She had not conquered this world, she had joined it. She reached the edge of the plains where her ship's remains still smoldered in silence. The wreckage was overgrown now, crystal growths curling around its metal edges like vines reclaiming a scar. She touched the hull, and the AI flickered awake. Nova's voice was soft this time. No commands, no protocols, only a whisper. Mission parameters obsolete. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she placed her hand over the console and replied, "So am I." The words felt freeing. The voice faded into the static of wind. The machine, like her, had learned to be silent. The collective spoke again, not as many voices, but as one unified tone resonating across the air. It wasn't language, but emotion, curiosity, acceptance, gratitude. The vibration rippled through her bones, warm and gentle. She understood what they were saying, though no words were exchanged. She had changed them as much as they had changed her. As the sound faded, the light around her began to rise, lifting the spores into a slow spiral. They were rebuilding the world, renewing the fields that had once been tainted by fear. She smiled faintly, realizing that peace had always been there, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. She built a marker on the ridge from fragments of glass and metal, a memorial, not for loss, but for beginning. Each shard reflected a different color when touched by light, forming a spectrum that mirrored the world's rebirth. As she finished, she pressed her hand to its surface and closed her eyes. In the silence that followed, she heard his voice again, faint but unmistakable. "You were never the monster." The words echoed through her, warm as sunlight through skin. She smiled through tears, knowing he wasn't gone, just everywhere now. The wind rose gently, carrying his light through the air like scattered memory. As the twin moons rose over Seraphis Nyx, Ilara stood at the ridge, the air shimmering with the pulse of a living world. The collective's glow spread across the plains like gentle aurora, no longer chaotic, but harmonious. She watched as the spores rose to the sky, drifting into orbit like stars being born. This world had changed her. No, it had remade her. She would not leave. She was the bridge now, a human voice in an alien choir, part of the balance she once feared. She looked to the horizon, whispering softly. Peace was never silence. The wind carried her words into the sky, where they became light.